So in preparation for Thanksgiving, I decided to create this giving thanks tile. And I'm starting with this scroll-shaped banner. Now, if you're not practiced at drawing banners, I would definitely suggest penciling in the banner first so you can play around with the actual shape and alignment and erase when necessary. But if you're pretty good and you've drawn banners, quite frequently, feel free to just draw it in without having those pencil lines to begin with. But I kind of like penciling in my banners as part of the string for my tiles. That way I can decide what I want the space outside of the banner to look like as well. So here I'm using a Micron PN. I find that this gives me a thicker line than when I use my Micron 01, so I quite like to draw with this one when I would like some bolder lines. And I'm experimenting with it a little bit because I usually use an 01, but I just got my hands on some PNs, so I'll decide which one I like better for which purposes. So to add a little bit more definition, I'm going to go ahead and add an aura to both the top and the bottom of this banner. Later on, I will ink it in using some sparkly Stardust jelly roll pens. As you ink in these auras, it's a really great time to just slow down. Remember that the Zentangle experience is supposed to be one of relaxation and deep concentration and focus. Really slowing down and making sure, as best as possible, that your aura is an equal distance away from the original line. Giving yourself that time to just slow down can help you make this a much more relaxing experience. So to add some shadow to the inside of the scroll, I'm going to put in just some hatching lines, so these straight lines in the background. And I'm going to go ahead and continue adding these hatching lines over both layers of the scroll. Later on, we'll add some cross hatching in that second layer of the scroll. So here I'm going to add in that message of give thanks. And I just did this in my own cursive handwriting, but feel free, to use any sort of fun letter style that you really enjoy. I also suggest penciling this in as well. That way you make sure that your words are following the curve of the banner. A few times I had written my words in, and oh gosh, they just didn't align and it looked all wonky. So this is one thing that I would suggest going ahead and like penciling in before you ink over. So finally we get to shading. This is one of my favorite parts when I'm drawing banners. This is when I feel like the banner truly comes alive and has just a bit more depth to it. Um, I had originally, when I first started drawing banners, I would shade all the way to the edge, but I saw some examples in one of my favorite books on lettering that has the shading like this where it's not quite towards the edge, and that made it so much more dynamic. So I always leave a little bit of a gap between the very edge and where I'm shading here on both sides of the front of the banner. I'm also going to add some shading back here where the scroll curls up on itself, again giving it a bit more depth for those bits of the scroll that go behind. All right, here's where the magic happens. Let's use our tortillion and blend in all of that graphite that we laid down. Yeah, that's looking good to me. So back to this auras we drew quite early in the video, quite at the beginning of the tile. We're going to go ahead and ink those in using a Stardust Jelly Roll pen. And I've played around on some of my different tiles using different color Stardust pens, but here I'm just using a gray. But this is sort of a fun place to play around with a hint of color if you happen to have a Stardust pen of one of your favorite colors. So the first tangle that we're going to draw is called Me Too, MI2, and here I'm going to go ahead and draw in some lines that will help me figure out where I'm going to add the dots to help me go ahead and begin this pattern. And I do begin this pattern a little bit differently than is shown in most step outs, in that I start just by putting in some dots in a grid-like pattern. Now at the end you won't be able to see these dots at all, so I just make them quite small. And then I'm going to draw a curved line either to the right or to the left of those dots, looking either like some eyebrows or a smiley face. Then on the next row I come in and I add that curved line to the opposite side, going around each of those dots. Then I come back in and I connect the ends of these curved lines, making this C-like shape that I can ink in here. And in the original tangle pattern, you start with these seed shapes rather than with the dots. I like instead coming in and drawing the seed shapes later. I thought of this pattern for Thanksgiving because it shows this sort of interweaving of these lined shapes as we come in the next step and add some auras. And I liked that idea of implying a sense of unity, that we're all interwoven, we're all interconnected. The things I do, the things you do, we affect those around us, and we can have a great impact on the world one way or the other. So it's important, you know, similar to how each one of our strokes should be deliberate as we're drawing, it's important that in life our actions are also deliberate and we have an idea of what kind of impact we're having on the world, taking into account that we are all interconnected. So here I'm going to draw an aura around each of those curved lines, and I'll continue auraing in until there's no more space left and I wind up with these sort of diamond shapes in the middle of these curves. So as I come on these like center diamondish, rectangularish shapes, I'm going to go ahead and ink them in. Add a little bit more drama to this pattern. So on the edges of the pattern here, it can look as if these lines are coming right on out. And so I think I need to add in some Mooka curls to make the pattern connect a little bit more to the space around it. So wherever I feel it's appropriate on the edge here, I'll go ahead and add some Mooka curls. I did a little bit of thinking as I was drawing this tile about, what I wanted to do with the space around these Mooka curls, and I leave it white here, but later on I go ahead and ink it in, which I think was a really great decision. It gave some more depth, as if that shadow in the background, and it really helps this pattern to look as if it's interacting with the rest of the designs and space on the tile. Now it is time for shading. Again, one of my favorites because it really does add a sense of depth and enhances that appearance of that interwoven feeling that I was talking about earlier. So on the inside of each one of these curves, I'll go ahead and add some graphite. So I'm going to go back in with my Pigma Micron pen and add in some rounding. So wherever there are little corners where the Mooka curl meets something else around it, or this little space where the Mooka curl curls in up on itself, here I'm going to add some rounding. But remember, I talked about earlier, later on I wind up coming through and inking in the space behind these Mooka curls. So this is, again, it was just me sort of experimenting to see, what do I like? Do I like it with just, the white background and having a little bit of rounding, or do I want to ink it in completely? So if you feel like inking it in completely, I would say go ahead and skip this step of rounding. All right, let's go in with our tortillion and smooth out all of this shading that we just added in. I just want to enhance the shading under the ribbon, really making it look as if this Me Too is coming out from under the ribbon. So I'll go ahead and add some additional graphite. I love that you can just add more and more layers of graphite over time, you know, to give it just a little bit more drama, a little bit more depth. So I want just a little bit more of sparkle. So again, going back to that Stardust Jelly Roll pen, on the second aura, I'm going to go ahead and ink that aura in with this Stardust pen. And again, I'm using gray here, but you can really use any color you would like, or multiple colors. It's really up to you. So next I'm going to add in this pattern, this tangle pattern called Toodles. And I really love this pattern because it is such a botanical pattern. But to be very honest with you, I'm still sort of figuring this pattern out and practicing it and seeing, what can I do to tweak it so that I like it even more. And here I'm going to be practicing this idea of letting some of the toodles go behind one another, make it so that you might not see the entire leaf shape, but you're still quite aware that it's there. So come along and experiment with toodles with me. So there are these little gap spaces, and I think I want to add in some little fescue curls here and there, again to help the toodles pattern sort of interact with the space around it. Now I like making these Toodle shapes kind of large and bulbous so you have a bit of space to go ahead and add in that graphite and give them some depth. And I'll start by just adding graphite to the outside edge of each Toodle so that you can see which one is going behind and which one's on top. Adding a little bit of graphite to each side of that center spine. And then I usually add a curl of graphite right along sort of the inside edge of the leaf, again leaving that gap between the edge so that there's a tiny bit of whiteness as the leaf curls under itself. Now that we've got our Toodles in here, I think I'm going to go ahead and put in the border. And wherever there's a fescue, I'm just going to leave a little bit of a gap between the fescue and the border. And then I'll put an aura line in here. We'll probably come in with that Stardust pen later and ink in these borders. As you can see, I just can't help myself when it comes to these Stardust pens. I love adding glitter wherever I can. I learned this pattern during the Inktober challenge this year. I had never heard of it or seen it before, and so I just couldn't help but sneak it in here. Unfortunately, for the next few seconds, I was accidentally off the screen, and I'm so sorry for that. However, you're just sort of drawing in these rounded, sort of geometric shapes. Some of them are more triangular-ish, some of them are more rectangular-ish. Here and there, I'm trying to be sort of as organic and random as possible. And then you draw these connector lines, rounding the edge of these lines. Again, it's a little hard to see, but you'll be able to see it in a few minutes, a few seconds really. Here we go, finally getting back on the camera. So you see there's these connector lines, and then you add a little bit of weight as the line connects to each shape, or as that line connects to the border. And then I like to go into each of these geometric-ish shapes and add a little bit of weighting toward one side, and I weight them usually all on that same side. Finally, you add some sort of geometric shape on the inside if you'd like, and sometimes it connects to the border with a line and other times it doesn't. This geometric shape on the inside can be, again, very organic. You can add a little weighting on that same side again if you would like. So again, just sort of playing around with these different geometric-ish, organic-ish shapes. Let's give it some more depth by adding some graphite shading. All right, let's ink in some of that Stardust jelly roll along the border. And then I always, almost always, like to shade around the outside of the border as well. Like we talked about earlier, I finally decided at this point that I just wanted to ink in the background space here, and I think it really does create a little bit more drama on the tile, inking in this sort of shadow background space. And that's it. I think we're done. Thank you so much for coming along this journey with me, drawing some beautiful Zentangles and celebrating Thanksgiving. I hope you had a wonderful holiday, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.